shooting class, both that playing for all day.
Nice.
Imagine they come out with Lego stores and it's like this Lego.
All right, let us get started today. Week 13. All right, and I can tell by just kind of looking at the numbers here. Of course, it looks like it's the same as always statewide. So good job. I can tell that looking at the class population, where the fatigue is setting in a bit. It's a little bit light, I think, in terms of the old attendance, but we'll have that. So if you see your colleagues that are maybe a little tired, a little worn out, encourage them. I know how it is. Week 13, we're almost there. Thanksgiving is soon, and basically, you know how it works at Purdue. Once we get done with Thanksgiving, it's sort of like that's when we really get into the semester wind down. For the fall. But we have some good stuff, though, to talk about. This should be a pretty fast lecture, actually. So if you're here and a little fatigued, a little tired, you'll get out of here, I think, a little quicker today. So let's get started. So lighting, because remember, we're doing our environment art topics now mainly because you're going to be picking a project and arting it up soon, or maybe you're even starting that now, whatever. And so now would be really the time that you think about your artistic lighting, although some of these things I think you can even do a little earlier, at least some of this stuff anyway. Okay, so it's important, I think, when you do your lighting, to think in terms not just of blasting around point lights and spotlights everywhere and just kind of willy-nilly, but really think in terms of a light rig. So what is a lighting rig? That's a set of lights where you have consistent parameters on those lights that you can apply to areas, to all the areas of your game where it makes sense to apply them. Okay, so in other words, you're not just going into set actor point light and then you get the default lighting, but you're actually trying to have a consistent lighting scheme, right? Because that's really important if your lighting is going to be effective, is to have some kind of consistency with how you light your levels. Okay, so this lighting rig is based on kind of standard 3-point lighting theory, which is called key lights, fill lights, and rim lights, and we're going to be talking about these right now. Okay, so a fill light, and here would be an example here, is a light that isn't, in the context of a game, video game fill light, right, is something that's not usually shadow casting. So it's used to simulate bounce lighting, kind of ambient bounce lighting, without actually having the engine have to calculate this in real time. So when you look at this example here, I had this point light with shadow casting turned off, placed here to kind of just give us a little more soft ambient lighting in an area that was shadowed that we don't want shadows, right? So that's what you use a fill light for. A key light is the primary light source in a scene. So in other words, in this classroom right now, the key lights would be these fluorescents that would be beaming down, right? And so you really wouldn't get very interesting shadows, and you're not supposed to, right? It's supposed to be just a flat lighting. That would be like the key light in this room, right? If you have a bedroom that just has like a lamp on your nightstand, and that's kind of the main light source, that's its key light. Okay, so these are going to be your shadow casting lights. And in Unreal, just the way the Unreal lighting system works, it's often the case that your key light's going to be a spotlight of some type, and it's going to probably rake across the objects like it's doing in this example, and you can see the shadows that are resultant from that. Now, not used here, and sometimes not used at all in a lighting scheme, but still worth talking about, is the rim light, which is something you place behind your subject in a scene. And one of the reasons why we don't always use rim lights is because it's a game and you can move around. These lighting principles are, based on film, TV shows, things like that, where there's more of a static presentation. But nonetheless, you can still use rim lights. So these are not brighter than your key light, by the way. So this would be a rim light that's placed behind these objects. And so you get this kind of effect until you move to the other side of the room, right? And that's always the challenge with games, is your ability to do that. All right, so the thing I'm really trying to encourage you to do here is to be consistent with your lighting scheme. And Unreal allows you to do that because you can make blueprints out of your lights. And that's really helpful because then you have kind of these saved off parameters that you always have. So if you have a point light, that you're using as a fill, and you really like its color and the amount of light intensity it has, and the radius and all the other settings, you can make a blueprint out of that. So you save off those parameters. So every time you drag in that new light blueprint, you're getting the same parameters, and you can still adjust the parameters, on the instance. So if you need to change something, you can. But now at least you're starting to achieve, some consistency. And really, in the context of lighting in Unreal, when you have a couple of these, in my case, a fill light and a key light blueprint, now you have your light rig, right? You have these tools that every time you go into a new room to light the room, you're going to put that key light somewhere, and you're going to use that fill light in places where you don't want it to be too dark. Okay, so some more kind of basic Unreal lighting tips. So shadow casting point lights are crazy expensive computationally, right? And the reason for that is because a point light casts light in a radial pattern, like everywhere, right? It's casting light all around the circle, right? So when you say that it's shadow casting, that means all those computations, right, are done, and it's very, very expensive, and that's going to be expensive either in two different ways. If you're using non-dynamic lights, in other words, you're having to occasionally hit the bake light button, the build lighting button in Unreal, it'll make your light bakes take a lot longer. If you're using all movable lights, it'll make the game run slower, because now we're talking about computing those shadows in real time. So, either way, it's going to not be performant, right? Whether it's with static lights, it's making your light builds take a lot longer because there's many, many more shadows that has to compute, or it's slowing your game down if you're using entirely dynamic lighting. So either way, be careful with it. Now, again, I actually like this technique of, because modern computers are capable of handling this as long as you're smart. If you just set all your lights to movable, you no longer have to do light bakes. And wow, that feels good. Feels real good to not have to hit that build lighting button. Now, depending on your game and how how many lights you're going to have and how complex it's going to be, you may not want to do this. Now, I know that in Aliens Fireteam Elite, at least the entire time I was on the project, we had all movable lights. We were not doing light bakes. That maybe that changed after I left, but I'm just trying to get across. Professional games do this actually, so this isn't like some hack trick or whatever. It's totally an option. It's just you have to be more careful with your lights when you make them all dynamic, because now Unreal is in real time calculating all that stuff. Okay, some practical design considerations in your lighting. Of course, this is the obvious one that everyone thinks of, and it's no less true. You can certainly utilize your lighting scheme to guide the player, right? Bright lights guide the player, and secrets can be obscured by making the light dim, right? This shouldn't be too hard to figure out. Now, despite this, 90% of the time when I look at projects, even projects that are, obviously when I'm just looking at a white box, whatever, I'm not really paying attention. But when I look at prototypes, like scripted prototypes that have had a couple scripting passes, you do tend to see lighting like this, which I just call the tossing the point light in the center technique, right? Where you just toss one in the room to get some lighting. And, in a situation like this, where you have a hallway, 4 different rooms, you need to go into the right one. There's nothing about this lighting that's helping the player, really, especially because the column object stuff in the center has no gameplay significance in this white box. So, that's sort of getting highlighted accidentally just by, again, just kind of how you would light things if you were building a white box, just tossing a point light in there. Just giving it a little thought can be very helpful. Let's say this is the room that we actually wanted you to go to. Now we have a much, I think the lighting's actually helping us navigate the space. It actually looks a lot cooler too. We get that kind of as a bonus. And I am using soft fill lights to kind of make sure it doesn't get too dark. You can kind of unfortunately see this is one of the challenge of the fill light thing is avoiding these obvious circles on the wall. You have to be it takes a little work to place them in such a way that you don't get those obvious circles and kind of the way you stack those lights together. Okay, so this is the lighting setup. So you can see the shadow casting spotlight here. Spotlights, by the way, are much better to use for shadow casting because they're only casting light in the one direction. So for all the reasons that a point light is really bad for shadow casting, a spotlight's really good because you're not casting light in a radial pattern. It's just from one direction. So spotlights are great for shadow casting. Point lights, not so much. Just remember that. Okay, so using lighting to highlight important elements, right? So interactable items, enemy locations, secrets, unless you want to hide them, right? And breadcrumbing players with lighting. All very obvious uses for lighting from a level designer's perspective, not necessarily an artistic perspective. Okay, I told you this was going to be short, and indeed it is. We're going to have another lecture on lighting, and if I was mean, I would just go, it's just 9:46, I would just go directly to that lecture and try to get 2 in one day, but I'm not mean. I'm going to let you go. We are done. We'll talk about lighting again on Wednesday. All right, see you later, statewide.